Welcome to the participants who are joining us. Dear friends, dear partners of our organizations, you are connecting from Argentina, Benin, Cameroon, Canada, Colombia, France, Niger, South Africa, Sri Lanka. We welcome you all. My name is Mathias Savignac. I'm the president of the Education and Solidarity Network, and it is a real pleasure to open this seminar on solidarity initiatives. 12 years ago, the General Mutual Society of National Education in France, Education International, and the International Association of Mutual Societies created the Education and Solidarity Network with the aim of bringing together at the international level those involved in education and health. We knew that education and health are interdependent. Good health, both physical and mental, of students and education staff is essential to quality education. Furthermore, education improves health and the well-being of individuals and ensures the sustainable development of communities. Education stakeholders are wonderful ambassadors and promote health and social welfare issues as well as the values of equality, democracy, and solidarity. Today, we bring together 45 organizations, mutual health organizations, education unions, SSC bodies, and other civil society organizations. Our strength lies in our diversity. Our actors share common values of solidarity, citizenship, and commitment, and engage on a daily basis to have access to strong public services, education, health, and social protection so that everyone can enjoy them. We worked together for 12 years, including during a pandemic, and there is no doubt solidarity and cooperation are an answer to the health, social, and climate crisis we are going through, and we'll have to continue to work together at the international level to guarantee access to education, decent work, and universal social protection. With this webinar, we offer you a world tour of our members' solidarity actions to share good practices. We will learn about initiatives by education unions, by mutual health organizations, as well as associations on issues such as protecting workers from the pandemic, health and social security education, the promotion of gender equality. These are issues of interest shared by many of our organizations. We want this to inspire us, take into account our practice, inspire us for new projects and new cooperations. Thank you to all the speakers from Gambia, the UK, France, Belgium, Mexico, Australia, and Côte d'Ivoire, who will take part today to this meeting. During their presentation, we invite you to ask your questions in the chat. We'll be able to provide an answer later on. I would like to thank our colleagues from the other two founding organizations, Duncan Smith, representing Education International, and Sibyl Reichard, head of the International Organization of Mutual Funds, who will introduce the various topics today. So I give the floor to Duncan. Thank you to you all.
Thanks, Mathias, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Buenos días a todas y todos. Before we jump to the first two initiatives carried by network members, I want to bring you the solidarity greetings, the fraternal greetings of Education International and its 384 member unions worldwide. As we continue with the long battle to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic, it seems that the values embodied by the network have never been more relevant, especially solidarity. But how do you teach about solidarity? How can you persuade a generation of young learners who are so accustomed to the individualism promoted by advertisers and big tech that you will be safer and happier if your friends, but also the strangers living around the block, are safe and happy too? The pandemic, like military wars before, is a stern reminder that we're all on the same boat, navigating through the same storm. And so does climate change, whose worst impacts seem to repeat with greater frequency and in more parts of the world than ever before. We will not come out of the crises unless we all help each other, unless we all make the effort of looking after each other. And yes, it all starts with education in the classroom. Quality education in a quality environment with a human teacher, not a robot, not just an iPad. We know robots and iPads won't teach you about solidarity. When human teachers come together, when they form unions, they build up the power to make solidarity a reality. And we're just about to see that solidarity at work in the Gambia, where it is not unusual for students to have to walk very long distances just to get to school.
In remote areas like Bolibana and many other places, schools are often far away, far flung, and even out of the way. This reality makes access to a fundamental basic need like education a huge challenge in a region perceived to be hard to reach.
We realize some of those students definitely they trek for over 8 to 9 kilometers to those schools on a daily basis. So going and coming will take them about 16 to 17 or even 18 kilometers every day. So realizing the need for them to get a support in order to at least facilitate their movement to schools definitely is a tremendous step in the right direction.
Teaching in such a remote community perhaps requires extra commitment and may not be a job for everyone, as the conditions here can be challenging.
In Boliban now, we even have an instance where a child is walking not only on foot, but literally barefooted, because this particular child even have a half shoe. If you look at the condition of the shoe, it tells you how much the child treks to go to school. The condition was so pathetic, and then that formed the basis for this particular initiative.
Hello, my name is Marie Antoinette Kaur. I am the General Secretary of Gambia Teachers Union. I'm here to talk about an initiative that is very dear to our hearts, that is the provision of bicycles to students. One time I got a letter from some students asking if we can support them with bicycles because they walk long distances to school, sometimes 5 kilometers going and 5 kilometers coming back. That makes it 6. Initially, I did not pay much attention to the letter, but one day on my way to the regions to visit the teachers, I saw a group of students walking. The sun was very hot, about 44 degrees, and the distance they had to walk was very long. So when I came back, together with the team at the secretariat, we started to think about what to do. Initially, we provided one, but later on, we got some funding from Steve Sinod Foundation, and we were able to provide 26 bicycles to students in rural and very disadvantaged communities. For us, it was very heartwarming because we got testimonies from the beneficiaries, and I want to read what one of them sent me. Before I had a bike, I used to walk long distance to school, tired, hungry, dirty, thirsty, and sometimes I used to dodge school. Now I am free because I ride with my friends. I'm sure I will do better in the exams this time round because I'm always in school and I am always able to do my work and do it on time. This testimony I got from one of the students. Also, one of the teachers sent me a testimony. Not only fewer children are missing classes now, but the number of children who feel safe traveling to school has increased. So the bicycle initiative is worthy of commendation. We applaud it. And every day, sitting in our office, we try to find ways and means of getting more bicycles that will benefit more students, that will take more students to school and allow them to stay in school. Not only go and stay, but perform very well. Thank you.
We should all encourage and congratulate Marie Antoinette and her GTU colleagues.
Nous devrions tous féliciter et encourager nos collègues de GTU pour avoir mis sur pied ce programme grâce à un financement solidaire pour aider les élèves dans les régions les plus éloignées de Gambie. Nous allons maintenant entendre un autre syndicat, le NASUWT britannique, qui va nous parler de la campagne à propos du Covid long, du Covid persistant. Et si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas à utiliser le chat. Merci de m'avoir invité à m'exprimer et à décrire cette campagne.
It's the pandemic, we hope, in the UK, and you may have seen the news that our last legal restrictions will come off on Monday. It's left us to think about the legacy of the COVID pandemic, and one element of that is long COVID, a whole range of conditions, often very variable, that affect people for months, potentially years to come. I've given a short definition of long COVID there, but if we can move on to the next slide. So we identified a number of key objectives that we wanted to try and achieve in the course of the campaign. Partly was raising the awareness of the experience of teachers, some of which may have caught it in their workplace, but whether in the workplace or elsewhere are suffering often debilitating symptoms of this misunderstood and lack of understanding around this disease. Elements we wanted to call for were for statutory recognition of the illness within legislation, bring it into line with conditions like ME and other chronic conditions that last for a long while and can have a very serious impact on the individual. To make sure that employers were fairly treating those teachers who are afflicted by this condition. To make sure that the teachers' pension scheme recognised the impact of this on teachers who were unable to work, and also demanding financial compensation for teachers who did catch it in their workplace, again, bring it into line with other occupational diseases. If we can move on. So we developed a campaign strategy that brought together all of these elements, used the central resources of the staff of the union and the tools we have available, but critically involved our members. We wrote to all of the lead ministers, as well as having I suppose what would be described as a federal government in Westminster. We also have governments in devolved nations who have responsibilities in this regard. So we wrote to all of them, setting out our key demands. We then emphasised that using our members, writing to their members of parliament and other elected representatives. We worked with the media and both conventional press and broadcast media, but also social media. And we're now starting the process of building the awareness and knowledge amongst our members, including through factual information, but also case studies and putting a personal face to this campaign. We provided a webinar and developed a campaign page on our website. We move on again. We needed to think about the branding. So all of the public information messaging in the UK over the last year to 18 months has used the format you see in front of you here, of this yellow background, either green or red hatching around the edge, and the idea of a triple message, 3 things in each set of branding. You see stay alert, control the virus, save lives, stay home, protect the NHS, save lives, Another variation was hands, face, space. So we decided to pick that up in our branding and to categorize our demands into three and to use that same imagery. And you can see that on the next page. So these were our three elements: raising awareness amongst our members, seeking recognition in law around the teacher's pension scheme, around the recognition of it as a disability, and the various other elements around that, but also about support and having employers and other systems in place to support members who were suffering from this disease. We've released those on social media, both in the format you can see there, but also as animations. We move on again. This is one of the animations. I'm not sure it will quite work, but if you click on it, you may actually see the items fall into place. Or maybe not, but you can see those on our social media, just basically providing a little bit of dynamism to help attract people's eyes on social media. You've got some examples of some of the press coverage we've got here, both in trade press, but also in the sort of mainstream media. We are now working on a campaign pack that will help us to build that profile in local media. So providing model press releases and text and statistics for our representatives in each municipality, in each local association to use. If we move on again, this is the phase we're moving into now. We need to really escalate that political pressure. And I should emphasize on some of these issues, particularly around employers, we're talking directly to schools, to governing bodies, to head teachers. And we have a system, what's called academization in the UK, where we have some schools which are run by municipal government and some which are run by chains which oversee certain schools. We're placing pressure on all of those to recognise and support sufferers of this condition within their schools. And we really need to raise awareness amongst members. We had our Disabled Teachers Conference a few weeks ago, and nobody who attended that identified as having suffered from long COVID. This may be that our members don't recognise it themselves as a disease. It's still little known, but also we recognise that many of the people who would have attended that seminar would have had conditions, meaning that they would have shielding and were possibly less vulnerable to contracting COVID in the first place. But there's a clear job of work to be done here, and raising awareness and changing the law and providing better support to these members. We're doing it in respect of schools and education, but working as part of a larger coalition led by the TUC to achieve that legislative change, so that whichever sector you work in, and wherever, well, indeed, if you don't work at all, you're provided with the support you need to get through this condition, which for many people have been actually more devastating than the short-term impacts of COVID. Very happy to take questions, but conscious working to a timescale, I wanted to give you a whistle-stop tour of what we're doing on this particular campaign.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. I don't see any questions in the chat, and perhaps, hands still have to be raised. But in the meantime, can I ask the following question? I would imagine that NASUWT is not the only union in the UK advocating for recognition of long COVID. What has been perhaps the immediate reaction of the government to the campaign? Does the campaign seem to be heading in the direction where that recognition would be ultimately achieved?
So I think the response has been slow at the moment. We're right on the cusp of the sort of abandonment, possibly a pejorative, but the end of legal restrictions on people's movement and the wearing of face masks at the moment. That alongside a certain recent football match seems to be absorbing much of the national attention at the moment. But the lobby that we've done has received a warm welcome from quite a lot of elected representatives. So it's building that groundswell. And as I say, there's a job of work to be done here about awareness. In the full flow of the pandemic, the long-term implications weren't really the health priority. But as we shift out of that phase of the impact, we really need to make sure that focus is on the long-term implications for potentially hundreds of thousands of people across the country.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Chris before we move on?
Just say I will put my email address into the chat. So if people do have questions subsequently, please do get in touch. I'm very, very happy to share the resources and the campaign pack we've developed if people want to use it in their own context.
It's always a good idea. Thanks, Chris. And perhaps I should say at this point that, and this may be may come as a surprise to people that are not actively involved in the trade union movement. But the international union movement is actually very actively pushing at the moment for health and safety at work, not just COVID, the whole health and safety dimension at work to be recognized as a fundamental right at work at the ILO conference next year. And so we will all be joining hands to make sure that it happens. I'm looking at a question in the chat, which is about long COVID and having a general explanation about what it is. I think we can refer the person to the first slide in your presentation for the definition.
I can add a little if it's helpful.
Yes, I think it would be good.
And I think the main problem here is we don't yet know. There are no common set of symptoms, just as with the immediate impact of COVID, not everybody had the same symptoms. Some people may have lost their sense of taste, and that was the only symptom they had. Some had a fever, some had a heavy cough, some others didn't. The impact seems to be the same with long COVID as well, that some people find it a range of different symptoms. The most common one seems to be extreme fatigue. And that seems to be the most common, but by no means universal. Lots of medical research is still needed on this issue and lots of awareness raising. We're convinced there's large numbers of people who have long COVID and are still struggling with the impact of the condition, yet don't themselves recognize it or understand it.
Thanks again. And so it will be time now to move to the next segment. And I hope that we have started answering the question, which is how do you teach about solidarity? I think what this network does, what its members do, is to lead by example. And it is our duty to show the world what we do and how members learn from other members how to help those in need. It is now my pleasure to give the floor to Sibyl Reichert, the director of AIM, who will showcase more achievements, more examples of the solidarity that unites us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Duncan. So, bonjour à tous, je vais parler en français. Tout d'abord, je voudrais remercier.
Good afternoon to all. I will speak in French. I would like to thank the ESN for inviting us to participate in this exchange of experience. As Matthias said in the introduction, solidarity and cooperation are responses to the health, social, and climate emergencies we are going through. I would even say that they are the only possible answer to get out of these emergencies by leaving no one behind. This is why AIM has adopted its present work program under the same title. Only solidarity and cooperation will enable us to build better cooperation and protection systems. This is what mutuals have been striving to do for ages, if I may say so, and this mission has become more evident than ever since this pandemic began. Through their actions, mutuals contribute to the achievement of SDGs. These are the goals that have guided them throughout the pandemic. COVID-19, beyond the obvious health impact it has had on our societies, has accelerated changes already underway, such as the digitalization of health, education, or at the workplace. It has highlighted latent issues. I'm thinking of mental health, but also of the vision and treatment of the elderly. And it has also exacerbated existing inequalities, hitting the most vulnerable hardest. Since the beginning of the pandemic, mutuals have been actively engaged in turning these challenges into opportunities. They have accelerated the digitalization of their services to enable business continuity. They have started to reimburse remote consultations and contributed to the implementation of online prescriptions and consultations. We have set up remote support and counseling services for people in psychological distress and have improved the coverage of this care. They have increased their efforts to support family carers and contribute to their recognition. They have worked in favor of greater collaboration within Europe and worldwide to ensure universal access to essential medical supplies, drugs, and vaccines. They have also played an important role in raising awareness of the public regarding barrier measures and vaccination. I know that the list is much longer, but I will stop here. The concrete examples that will be presented to you next illustrate some of these essential roles that I've just mentioned. The first of these comes from France. Mylène Bonnel and François Chabrissou, whom I'd like to greet, are going to talk to us about the projects developed within the MGM and the VIV group in order to provide better support to members and more broadly to the population in general at specific moments in life, in particular that of carers and people who are taken care of. Mrs. Bonnel and Mr. Chabrissou, I give you the floor. Camera, please.
Je règle ma caméra, excusez-moi. Est-ce qu'on peut passer la vidéo peut-être à voir?
Oui, ça va être projeté.
Do you show the video?
Paf, il est tombé comme ça.
Elle est malade, bon ben il faut faire avec. Et tout a démarré comme ça.
He fell, she's sick. It all started in this way. I'm doing this because I'm the only one who can do it. We are carer if you love. It's our daughter, so we don't have much of a choice. We have to go ahead for her. We have a different role now, like mother and child. I stopped my job, I quit my job, and I'm taking care of my daughter. She's 20 kilos, that's her weight. It is disquieting, but we're still thinking of the future.
Voilà, c'était une petite illustration en fait effectivement.
This was a small illustration of a number of projects that we are carrying out in MJN. We want to accompany members to facilitate access to healthcare and make life easier for those who undergo a crisis. And we thought it was a nice illustration for several reasons. In France, you see people who can help relatives. 65% of carers are women. 50% of these carers are under 50 years of age. Most of them, 60%, have a job, and over half of them don't know that they are used as caregivers, and they do it naturally. Sometimes the situation is quite complicated, and they can't cope. They just show goodwill, they do their best, but they don't always use the services they have a right to. So within MGN and the VIV group, we try and detect who may need some help, some assistance, and recommend assistance, services. And before the assistance that mutuals could give them, we recommend assistance from the state, from public services. Sometimes they're not well known or they're quite complex. So we want to make possible for them to access their rights and social protection offered by the mutuals. So this is a key element. I know I have very little time, but some of the highlights of 2020, both for the mutual and for my territory. We have a number of services. Cécile, could you switch off your mic, please? Thank you. Now, as far as the mutual is concerned, we try and give counseling to people. We got a number of calls from members. We give them guidelines, orientation when they need it. For my territory, we have a number of houses or homes for the elderly with a handicap. So we helped their caregivers find the right services. And the COVID-19 period has reminded us that the French population is aging, that we should accompany as much as possible with home care as much as possible. We want the elderly to stay at home as long as possible. We want them to age in place. This is what families usually want as well. And when you don't have any or enough caregivers, you go to your GP, you will ask emergency services, but we want to give basic care to the population where they are living in remote places when they're not downtown. I will give the floor to Mylène because I don't have much time, but I think that mutualists shows what it is here for, when it gives the right type of assistance and counseling to its members and make possible for people to benefit from public service and from social protection during the whole life. Mylène. Thank you, François. Thank you, Sibylle, for the handover. Quickly, the message we wanted to convey with François is to show in a very concrete way how our MGM and other associations work, in particular for this relationship between caregiver and people who receive this care. My territory is in a rural area, and I want to talk about two schemes. The first one was copied from Quebec. It's called baluchonnage. It's a type of respite care. And the second one is for people to age in place, in particular for senior dependents. We want to keep our elderly at home, in particular if they want to, and the impact it has for the caregiver who is solicited in this type of situation. For this system, baluchonnage, which is a respite care system that has existed for quite some time in Quebec, but which has existed since 2019. It's a system of respite care. You have a professional caregiver who comes to the domicile of the handicapped people or sick person, because the caregiver needs to get some respite. This respite care system has existed since the beginning of 2020, when there was a pandemic peak in my territory. And many caregivers have used this system of respite care. And it was unanimously accepted because 95% of those who used this respite care declared that they were ready to ask for it again. So we've seen that this, which has been allowed since 2019 only in France, was a total success, and we hope it will develop. Regarding the aging in place system in France, this means that we want to bring innovations and services to the domicile of the person. If you have somebody who is not autonomous anymore, but the person wants to have home care or residential care, well, the person has access to the same services she would get in a residence, in a nursing home. And we assess the needs of the person who will receive the care, and a program is set up. I'm told that there's a problem. Coordination is to offer activities for the person to age in place, help with meals, domestic help. There's also a system of healthcare. We see what the remote consultation or rehabilitation could be, but just like for the respite care system, we give help to the caregiver with temporary housing for the person when the caregiver can cope anymore. So this is what we do in this relationship, which is very specific between the caregiver and the person who receives healthcare. Thank you very much, Mylène and Mr. Chaprichou. Thank you for these examples. They do show in practice how we can help. We will leave questions for the end of the session, if you don't mind. And we've talked about the commitment of mutuals in favor of better mental health. And Mr. Thirion, who is a member of Impasse dans l'Impasse, will now show us a scheme for the for suicide prevention put together by this association. You have the floor, Mr. Thirion.
Donc je vois que quelqu'un va diffuser.
Good morning. Next slide, please. So let me tell you about our organization, which depends on the Solidaris group in Belgium. Then we have a system for self-employed going through a difficult situation. So this is an association, a non-profit making association for suicide prevention and the improvement of mental health. We have 4 different structures: a suicide prevention center, support center, a reference center as well, and a service of prevention and health promotion in prisons, and a psychological support center for self-employed people going through a difficult stretch. So this exists since 2018. We have 8 centers in Wallonia, the French-speaking part of Belgium, without including Brussels. And we are there to support people who are affected by the issue of suicide. We have interviews for those who have suicidal thoughts, or people who are mourning because of a suicide, the relatives who do not always get support and advice. We also have a social support service. We do awareness work for health professionals. Then we have a second center, a reference center for health professionals for the psycho and medical sector. We have a lot of information, meetings. We have an observatory of practices in health, mental health, and I'll tell you about the Sentinel network. A third service, the prison service. We work in 15 prisons in Wallonia, for mental health, risk reduction, addiction. We had an inventory of the needs of prisoners and their guards. And from September, we are going to set up some activities, but it is very important, of course, to have a yearly assessment of these actions to see what impact it has on the mental health of prisoners. And then we have psychological support for self-employed people going through difficulties. In France, you have the EPISA, which is very well known. We have set up a phone line, a free phone line. We also have a Sentinel network, psychologist networks, and we offer 8 free sessions of psychological support. So the Sentinel system, we realized that the first cause of death for those aged 30 to 34 is suicide. That is why in 2018, 1,782 Belgians committed suicide, and we created that network of sentinels so as to have an early detection of those at risk, to facilitate support in mental health, because we know that it is a cultural factor in Belgium. People find it difficult to ask for help. They don't say, well, I'm not feeling well, I'm going to phone a psychologist. It's very difficult for them. So we want to facilitate support, and we want to reduce that rate of 10% by 2021. So who can take part? Well, any citizen who wants to be involved in suicide prevention can be part of this Sentinel network. They just have to contact my structure. They have free awareness, and how does it work? A sentinel who has been trained to detect someone in psychological distress will notice someone who is not well, will tell him, well, I'm worried about you. Would you accept for a health professional to contact you? It is to, once there's the agreement, this is a legal obligation. You have to get the consent of the person concerned. Then there's an alert which is sent by the sentinel, and within 24 hours, our psychologists contact the person to analyze his needs and to put him in touch with a psychologist close to him. So it is quite innovative. Those who are not feeling well don't have to look for help. They are really cared for within 24 hours, so it's very quick. To get someone close to them to help them. And we are really making the effort to put that person in contact with the psychologist. Next slide. It is also support which is offered to the self-employed, because unfortunately, because of the COVID crisis we are going through, many self-employed workers have had a collapse of their business, and it was important, as it's done in France, to offer something. In July 2020, we started in Wallonia, and the federal government became aware of our initiative and asked us to have that initiative throughout Belgium. You know that we have 3 different regions in Belgium with different languages, and we were asked to provide that support in the other regions. So we have the phone line 0100 in French and Dutch, and we have this specific line for self-employed people. We're in touch with the Chamber of Commerce, all those who are in direct contact with self-employed workers. And we have about 650 psychologists working for us, and we offer up to 8 free sessions. It is the same system as the Sentinel network offered for suicide prevention. I won't dwell into that so as to respect the time which is allotted to me. But if you have questions, if you want to know the difficulties we've faced, if we want to set up something similar in your region, don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Thérion. I suggest that if you have questions, you raise your questions in the chat. The third example comes from Mexico. Mr. Martin Gomez, responsible for the health education system in the Hospital of Mexico. He'll tell us about what is done by this general hospital in Mexico since the start of the pandemic. Mr. Gomez, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here and to present the case of Mexico and the many webinars that we were able to organize during the pandemic. We've been able to collaborate and work on a hospital without walls. And so we wanted to use the information center of this hospital to have different actions, to carry out different actions. If you could project my slides, that way you can see. We wanted to support healthcare personnel. At the same time, we were in touch with our citizens. We started with a series of webinars, and I'm just mentioning this to give you more context, but I think my slides are not appearing on the screen, or at least I'm not able to see the slides. In this talk, I'd like you to walk away with some important, simple tools that you can do every day that are not just for pandemic times. Solutions that are more effective, that are more cost effective. I mean, we need to invest very little and they can work very well. I'm thinking about focusing techniques as well as relaxation techniques. I'd like to share several with you. Another important thing to take into account is sleep. If we're not sleeping well, or if we're disturbing our sleep time, that will also generate a stress signal to our body. And therefore, it is going to require us to eat foods that are richer in fats, flour, and sugar. I'd like to share some data from the General Hospital in Mexico. The Hospital General de Mexico is the largest hospital in the country with more than 52 medical specialties. Many of these departments or specialties had to change their rooms to be able to treat COVID patients. We have more than 2,000 employees and more than 1,500 had to take time off because they were suffering from COVID-19. And this is why we had to train a lot of personnel that had not been involved in treating COVID-19. And so this surcharged our workers in having to deal with new tasks. This is the hospital that has treated the highest number of patients, more than 250 in total. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. If we look at when looking at the general situation, we decided to organize different webinars We wanted to have an interdisciplinary approach that is focused on primary healthcare attention. We decided to focus on 3 different fields. To start with, it was very clear to us that we had to give more support to healthcare workers, both GPs as well as nurses, nursing personnel, and primary healthcare personnel. So we decided to give a lot of urgent psychological healthcare. These are, of course, just a few of the initiatives. So for urgent psychological care, we thought about how important it was to deal with grief after COVID-19. And so we had many participants interested in webinars on grief. Healthcare professionals also spoke about the impact on safety, the consequences that COVID could have on their safety in terms of having to work with patients that had very serious COVID and the fact that many patients were dying. This was extremely important to us. The second line we decided to work on was how to respond to certain situations in terms of protection at home, at patients' domiciles, because if we look at the general situation of the country, more than 50% of our citizens are under the poverty line, and we see that the living conditions that they have do not enable them to deal with the pandemic in the long term. So having to live in reduced spaces, 5 people in a single room, for instance, was a main challenge. We spoke about mental health care for children and adolescents. And the third topic that we considered very important is uncertainty. How we deal with uncertainty at the hospital and how to obtain first-line information on the latest advancements of the disease and the latest scientific news on the disease. So we had different webinars on medicines and epidemiology of COVID-19. Next slide. So for instance, after the first stages of the pandemic, we decided to focus on non-COVID subjects. This was, of course, also based on this idea of giving a space for dialogue, for exchange in a situation where we feel very saturated. And we also thought about new formats, so video format in order to inform patients. We had 1-minute video clips that were also shared on the webinars. The webinars are also recorded and shared on Facebook, so they're open to anyone that is part of the network and that wants to be informed on this. And of course, we will also have social protection base in healthcare. How to deal with different emergencies. At the same time, we defend solidarity. You have my contact data on the slides and also the link to the different videos on Facebook. And I'd like to conclude by also giving recognition to Gareth and John, because his contributions were always extremely enriching, and I also like to remember Jean-Philippe Rouchet, who was my first contact in the network. I had the chance of meeting him, and I have very fond memories of him and his commitment with solidarity and mutualities and the mutual movement. So thank you very much, and I'd like to dedicate my presentation to both of them as a humble homage. Thank you very much.
On a vu quelques
Thank you very much. We had some examples which show how mutual funds and they can support carers. They are really the embodiment of solidarity. I give the floor to Matthias because I don't think that we have time for questions. We're a bit late. Thank you very much, and I'll give the floor to Matthias.
Thank you, Sibyl. We are some 20 minutes late on the webinar on the initial intentions, so we will continue with the presentations. I just hope that those who are attending the webinars will be able to attend everything and stay on. So we've heard a number of initiatives from stakeholders in social protection, healthcare, etc. And we would like to show you now a new education tool from the ENSSS, EN3 S's in France, which illustrate how to teach social protection. And it explains how it works, and there are a number of education initiatives taken, and I would like to give the floor to Nolwenn Carafrey and Pauline Gare to present this initiative. Over to you. Before this, we will show you the video of the resource that will be presented. Social security tree. It is made up of a solid trunk, the principle of solidarity, and different branches which embody the risks against which security protects you. To understand this tree, you need to go to its roots. Social insurances are born within the framework of a working and industrial society. Wages bring regularity and predictability to workers. In front of whatever event that may stop the payment of wages, insurance systems are put in place. It is in Bismarck's Germany at the end of the 19th century that you can find part of the roots of social security. At the time, in France, the first protections are set up in the mining or railway sectors, and you can find them in some of the branches of the social protection tree. They're called specific or special regimes. With time, law started to recognize accidents at the workplace in 1898, occupational diseases in 1910, healthcare and sick leave and retirement with the text of 1910 and 1928, as well as child allowances for the family branch in 1932. And then you have a quiz.
Cette protection est d'abord limitée
This protection was limited to salaried workers in some sectors and covered only industry and trade workers and their families. Social security, the social security system, it was set up in 1945 after World War II, based on solidarity as its main value. Hello. I come from N3S, but Pauline is the one to start. Hello, Thank you very much to ESN for enabling us to present this particular tool, which was set up within a mission to promote solidarity around social security. And the social security tree is an interactive video which lasts more than 1 minute with 3 quizzes. It had been developed for an online event during the COVID crisis called One Season with the Social Security, and students at the end of high school, beginning of university, college, could discover how social security and social protection worked. This video is part of a module that was conceived for this particular event, but it can be shown as a standalone tool, separate from other activities. And it shows the history of social security, its development, and the progress made by the institution to reach its present mission and organization. Initially, it was drafted for people between 16 and 25 years of age, but it reaches a much wider public, people who want to have a first level of information on social security in France. And it enables us to describe the construction of the French social security system, the organization and different missions of social security in France, the system development together with the French society, and the setting up of the autonomy branch in France, which would enable the to take up the problems of dependency and lack of autonomy, in particular for the elderly. So this is how we presented this. I'm taking over. As Pauline was saying, this video is part of a partnership with the education, the Ministry of Education. And it has enabled us to illustrate how social security was constructed, was built in France, and its development to reach the present mission and organization with a tree, as you were able to see. Then a number of games and quizzes were integrated, embedded in the clip. There is a feedback when you answer the questions, and you have a number of games and quizzes, and the information given in the feedback then are taken up in the construction of the tree. This tool was set up with the Ministry of Education, as I explained. We've listed the needs of teachers. We had a number of tests carried out with students, and then in parallel with this video, we send them a manual, a guide to help the teacher use this particular tool. This is how this education tool was set up. Thank you. Thank you. Many thanks to both of you. I'm taking over. You said it, but the knowledge of the history, values, and functioning of social security is vital to guarantee and defend this right to social protection in France, but also in all countries. Now, we bring you an initiative from our Australian member, Mutual, called Teachers Health, which is also committed to developing a reconciliation action plan for the country's indigenous population. This is a historical issue, but also a way to raise awareness of cultural diversity and to promote the inclusion of Aboriginal communities and their access to health, education, and employment. I think we have a video.
We're delighted to share with you one of our current initiatives that teaches health, our Reconciliation Action Plan. Before we commence this presentation, we would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land throughout Australia and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today and celebrate their enduring connections to and knowledge of the land, waterways and sky. Today's presentation will provide some context about our organisation and also the state of reconciliation in Australia, what a Reconciliation Action Plan is, why it's important to us, how we approached it and where to next. We're excited to share this initiative with you and about the impact and outcomes it will have for our organisation and the greater community. We're Australia's largest industry-based health fund, a position made possible due to our large, loyal and diverse membership. Our members are at the heart of everything we do. They're primarily people that work in the education industry, including teachers, university and administration staff and their families, together with nurses and midwives and their families. As an Australian values-led organisation, we believe that we have a role to play in creating change by acknowledging past injustices and ongoing inequalities experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and by committing to working towards a more equal and respectful future. By commencing a RAP, we can enable all staff to contribute to and benefit from progressing reconciliation in our organisation by creating a workplace culture that understands, values and respects the histories, cultures and contributions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So what is a Reconciliation Action Plan? It commits us to real action using a framework that's been created by Reconciliation Australia, a non-government, not-for-profit foundation established to promote continuing national focus for reconciliation. The framework was guided by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders' perspectives. It means we've got an opportunity to create positive change within our spheres of influence. That includes our employees, our members, and the communities we operate in, ultimately contributing to change across the nation. Through the three key areas of relationships, respect, and opportunities, we aim to build relationships of trust, walking with our Aboriginal people and organisations, demonstrate respect through increased awareness and understanding, acknowledging past wrongs, learning about the rich and diverse histories and teachings of the longest living cultures in the world, and building solid foundations relating to employment, education and business for greater opportunities in the future. By engaging in the RAP program, we'll join thousands of organisations across Australia working together to contribute to the reconciliation movement. The latest report from Reconciliation Australia found that organisations contributing to the program procured over $2 billion worth of goods and services from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses. Reconciliation Australia's CEO said that the RAP program is making a difference by markedly changing the way people think and feel about reconciliation, colonisation, and the relationship between non-Indigenous and Indigenous peoples in Australia. So,
Merci beaucoup. Mathias, tu peux reprendre la parole.
Merci. Thank you, Matthias. You have the floor again. I'd like to thank the representatives of Teachers Health for this clip. We will be able to share it with participants. Brent Jones, the CEO, was not able to attend our webinar because of the time difference, but it shows that we need to raise awareness of cultural diversity and to promote the inclusion of Aboriginal communities and their access to health education and employment. Everywhere in the world, women are discriminated against. Many of our members fight against discrimination and work to empower women. And on this point, for our last intervention, I would like to show you the PASS initiative, which is based in Abidjan. You have the floor.
Bonjour à tous, je suis Divya.
Good morning, my name is Divya Kibangu and I'm responsible for communications of the Social Strategy Support Program PASS in Côte d'Ivoire. On behalf of PASS, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to take part to this webinar and to present you our project, which is the mobilization and awareness raising campaign initiated in favor of the members of the International Network of Women in the Solidarity Economy. REFES is an initiative of PASS to create an interactive platform to reflect the decision of mutualist women after the first edition of the International Day of Mutualist Women. It is a platform which enables women leaders elected or salaried to continue to work together despite the distance and to act for the development of the structures in which they are involved. As the third edition of that International Day of Women in Mutuals couldn't take place this year because of health restrictions, PASS set up a campaign with video clips to raise awareness of women on issues that are of prime concern in their social, professional, and even family environments. So we have a series of 12 video clips from the south and the north, broadcast through the REFES channels until the next International Day of the Mutualist Women. The aim is to strengthen the mobilization of women leaders in the governance of private health financing mechanism of the mutualist type, and more generally, the systems of solidarity-based health coverage system. So far, we have published 2 video clips, and the first results of this ambitious chain of solidarity show a greater involvement of women to take ownership, to build a more supportive society through their initiatives. So we are optimistic. At the end of the campaign, we will have a more dynamic, more committed network and a greater number of women who will have joined this mutualist movement in Côte d'Ivoire, in Africa and the world. Thank you.
Je suis Dr. Mam Assetou Laurence.
So my name is Dr. Assetou Laurence Camara. I'm the wife of Alata and I'm from Côte d'Ivoire. Since 2017, I've been the second vice president of the MUGEF-CI. It's a real honor for me to chair the most important mutual insurance company in our region. We are wholeheartedly committed to trade union activism, including social activism. We work there because we've found a lot of injustice done to women. The governing bodies of our various organizations lack women in decision-making positions. When we want to provide information, we give it to men, but when we want to take action, well, we call on women. Thank you to Bas for this video. The networking of women mutualists in Africa and internationally also inspires women in Latin America. A network of women in this social and solidarity economy was created this year. Gender equality is an issue on which several members and partners are active. We have, for instance, the educational system based on stereotypes from a dozen. So time has come now to close this webinar. Thank you to you all, speakers, participants, to share our experience and good practices at the international level is really our raison d'être. So you can visit our site, educationsolidarity.org, to get more information on the initiatives, but also to discover the actions of our other members. We work on support to mental health, citizenship education, the fight against climate change. There are many topics at the crossroads between health and education on which we'll be very happy to discuss with you. But before concluding this seminar, I would like to thank Louise, Awa, and all the interpreters. Thank you for all your support.